fellow traders. 'Tis I, the Rumpled One, coming to you on Tuesday, December the 9th. The year's 2025. Let's talk trading. How to improve your trading. These videos are for educational purposes only. Your results may differ from mine. As always, have risk management in place. Make sure you're not willing to lose. You're not losing more than you're willing to lose on any one single trade or during a trading session. So I'm going to say something that is obvious. In fact, most of the things that I say are obvious, but lots of times what's obvious goes unseen. If you want to improve your trading, something has to change. Because if you keep everything the same, do you really believe it's going to improve? I think there's a quote by Einstein that is about that. I'm sure you've heard it. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. So, how to improve your trading? Well, I've been watching and studying about learning. There's some videos out there on YouTube where you're saying how you can learn fast and how the Japanese learn and all these different things. And one of the things that they talked about in learning how to do something fast or how to learn fast is rather than figuring out what works, figure out what doesn't work and then don't do it. It's kind of looking at the wrong end of the telescope, some people might think, but it works. If you know that a certain thing doesn't work, then you don't do it. So, for example, you don't take a trade with your maximum number of lots allowed. You just don't do it. It's not smart because it could go against you and you could wipe out your account very quickly. So take a look at what you're doing and figure out if there's a part of it that's not working or not working well. And then eliminate that part, change it. Because I've said probably years ago that, sometimes you just need a minor adjustment, a tune-up. Sometimes you need a major overhaul. And changing your trading method, your trading system, your trading plan, that's a major overhaul. And you probably don't need to do that unless you have one of those charts on drugs where you've got so many indicators and overlays and sub windows you can barely see the price. I throw up a lot of different charts. I've got, dashboard, we're talking about wick zones and, where things are compared to the open and the pivot. I've got, the weekly gap, once again, comparing price to the open and looking at the wick zones and, do you have an inside bar? And then the weekly opening range. And then we've got, where we are on the year, But if you look at this chart, it's just simple 5 lines. And I spoke about the inside bars, looking at daily, weekly, monthly. Some people, maybe if you're doing intraday trades, you look at the hourly inside bar. That's, I forget the trader that used to do that, but he was very successful trading on the last hourly inside bar. Or in this particular case, it's just looking at the range and where it is in relation to the fib, the current fib. And speaking of range, let's see, we got the pound Australian dollar leading the pack. And the Swiss franc yen's moving again. I think I may have only traded that once or twice, but I'm just wondering what's going on between the franc and the yen. But another is just trading the buy zone here. Weekly open crossover, daily open crossover, and between the two, I like to call it no man's land. And when it goes from one side to the other, there's usually a nice move. So here it went from daily cross to weekly, nice move. Then weekly cross to daily, nice move. And then, the rat zone, just based on statistics. And then, simple pivots with a couple of different things that give a trading bias. And usually when the Bambino Flex and the pivot trading plan, when they predict the same thing at the pivot, it's usually pretty strong indicator. And here, your pivot trading plan bias near S1 was long. Well, here it almost got down to S2. So if the bias at S1 is long, anything below it is going to be also long. And it looks like we took out the weekly pivot too. And, usually these pivots get taken out. Even though right now we've got 5 open pivots, but you can see we had one in December, but that got taken out already. Actually, we had 2 missed pivots in December here. That one got taken out, and then this one got taken out on the daily. Like I said, the weekly just got taken out today. And the monthly, we still missed it by 7 pips. Or wick zones, right now 65%. That's still, that's basically 2 out of 3 times prices are going to stay in that wick zone. And we know price likes to move, in and out of the lower, in and out of the upper, both directions. A lot of action. And once again, we're just looking at basically 4 or 5 horizontal lines here. And then, looking at the ATR zones here, wick zone, rat zone, holos. And how many bars since the high and the low. You can see all these ones are making highs. The red ones are making lows. You can see, so in this hour, the pound made a new low all the way down here. It's moved 25 pips off of that low. Once again, simple price action. More horizontal lines. And so I'm going through these charts here just to show you that, you could pick any one of these and trade them and be successful. Or you could fail. But it's not the system. It's you, the trader. That's why I say you got to look in the mirror a lot of times to see what you need to change. Because we can only change what we can control. What can we control? Well, we can control what method we use, and then we can control, when we enter, where we exit, in terms of, Do we exit with a profit or a loss depending on what price is doing? We can't control what price is doing, but we can control our reaction to what price is doing, whether it's giving us an opportunity to take profit or we have to say, hey, we need to cut this loss. We control our risk, how much are we willing to risk on a trade, and how does that translate into position size and stop loss. So, that's what we can control. We can control what pair or pairs we trade or what instrument. We could trade stocks or futures, crypto. There's many things to trade, commodities. We can control that. But, which way it ticks next, we don't control that. I mean, we could use something as simple as a flip-flop box. Right there being up 3.6 pips. I mean, and that was basically that trade right there, that was a classic flip-flop. You had the flip-flop box forming. Actually, you had one here also, but this was a bear candle. So actually, you could have taken the first flip-flop box here and the second one here. And in this case, they both closed below the EMA 5. This one closed below EMA 5, and EMA 5 had a negative slope. So we're using the squiggly, basically telling us which way to trade. Not necessarily to trade, but if you're going to trade, which way. I mean, because here, if you were taking crossovers, it already moved, over 10 pips, almost 15 pips from the bottom to this point. But you could have taken that trade and still made money. So there's many, many, many different ways to trade, as you all know. And the question is, you pick one and you can't really control what price does next. So now if you had stayed in that trade, you'd be up more pips. And sometimes you can just ride this trade because it looks like the indicator 2 here is going to, on the M1 is going to cross the indicator 2 on M5. And if you're using the multimeter, you can see if this number becomes less than this number and they're both red, then it crossed to the downside. And then you can see here, with the new price action score that you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in a row. And based on statistics, that's, going to 8 or 9 isn't very likely. It could happen. But, after 4, it's probably telling you don't enter the trade in that direction. It could continue, but basically, at this time, you're starting to look for reversals. You can see here we've had some pretty big runs at times. So even though the range is still low for the day. So, fellow traders, that's how to improve your trading. Just remember, if you want to improve, you've got to change something. Because if you don't change, don't expect it to improve. Because it's not what you trade, it's how you trade it. So go out there and drain the banks. This is the Rumpled One, over and out.